Zach, welcome to the show.
Blessings, brother. Grateful to be here and grateful to share my message while I'm in this space.
So I wanted to start off by asking you, what was it like working at an ayahuasca retreat center?
Well, just diving right in. uh,
Yep.
it was like really crazy, actually. You go into the space, people are arriving from across the world to sit in ceremony and to heal. And it's crazy. They're releasing like so much emotion, so many emotions like anger, sadness. People are crying, purging, cleansing their whole body, like sweating, shaking. It's one of the craziest places to be in, and really beautiful at the same time. For myself, I realized that everyone has the shadow. Everyone has these past traumas and stories that we're holding on to. And it's really beautiful to come together and accept them and also let go and release them and release these stories that we've held on to for so long. And having that chance to just observe it and doing it as a group and community is so powerful. It's been one of my most enriching experiences in my life, and it's helped me a lot in understanding how I can be of service to the collective.
I would imagine, you know, a place like that where you all get together and heal together is incredible because so much of the time people feel like they're alone in their life and they can't go to anyone to talk about their problems or to somebody help them heal with anything. And so to hold that space and do it in a group setting is incredible, especially if it's a group of like-minded people and people who have similar goals. We already know how important surrounding yourself with people who have similar goals to you is, and all trying to heal in that scenario. And you mentioned the shadow, which is really interesting. I believe Carl Jung coined it. Shadow is like that dark part of yourself where, you could say is capable of doing bad things. But generally speaking, I think it's I think we could probably agree that the shadow is kind of just the dark parts of ourselves that aren't healthy for us, aren't really healthy for other people. They hold us back. They're negative thinking patterns, they're negative thought processes and beliefs, just ingrained thoughts into our mind. And if we can work on healing that through whichever process we choose, that's an amazing process. And I haven't done too much research on it, but from what I can tell, you can't completely eliminate the shadow, but you can definitely do work with it to have the lighter parts of yourself and the better parts of yourself shine and be potent in your day-to-day life. I don't know what your opinion or belief is on that.
Yeah, it's essential. I something I've realized recently. Also, it's not getting rid of the shadow. It's more of a coming to terms with the shadow. So I see it as being able to integrate it into your life so that when it comes up, it's not as strong. So what I can easily like share is emotions. So you can imagine our connection and the way we experience the shadow is through the emotional body. So say there's a really strong emotion that comes up, we're triggered by something just in our day-to-day living. That emotion, let's say, for example, anger, sadness, it could be fear, all these dense emotions become a little bit less dense when we do some of the shadow work and integrate it. And then when it comes up, we know there's something to look at, there's something to observe in ourselves. And like our greatest opportunity for growth comes from our shadow. It's less about things happening up in the mental field and becomes more like, oh, I'm feeling this now. I'm feeling anger, I'm feeling afraid, I'm feeling sadness or guilt or shame. All these emotions are really powerful healers. They allow us to tap into ourself and really understand our body and our mind and our spirit on a deeper level.
A big portion of what you were saying leads back to awareness, being aware of what you feel and why you're feeling that way. And so you can start to control it because what we're not aware of, we can't control. I mean, that's why we see, you know, generally speaking, there's some people that are primarily negative, and you look at the negative in every situation. Somebody says something to them, they immediately respond with anger. There could be some deep shame within them, whatever it is, whatever past traumas, whatever you want to label it as. People, your own personal life, that you would say are rude, disrespectful, they're an asshole. Most of the time, you have to realize that, of course, yes, they are being disrespectful, they're not being nice, but it's not really anything personal against you. They have issues that they're going through. They have mental processes that they haven't been aware of and dealt with. And so they're not even really aware what they're doing. I'm sure they probably know they're being rude, they're not being nice, right? You could pretty understand that. But they don't fully understand why they're doing it. They just feel like they need to and they do it. And it's more of an unconscious process rather than I need to target this specific person and I want to hurt them. It's kind of just like I'm dealing with this stuff and it's projecting it out onto other people. So my general advice to people is, when you come across people like that, especially people that you don't know and throw hate and negativity at you, 99% of the time, it's nothing personal. It's just you're there in that moment and they can express that anger onto you, so they will. But they're not really even aware of it.
And something that comes up immediately for me, reflecting on what you're saying, is that that's the trigger. So sometimes we get triggered or by other people's trigger. So one person's trigger and it's like a chain reaction. Their negativity triggers more negativity, and I think it's the opposite can also happen. Like you can trigger positive energy and positivity. That negative trigger is what a lot of the world is running in, that cycle of beliefs and stories about I can't do that, I won't do that, she's not listening to me, or he doesn't understand me. All these things are creating a victim mentality. It's like more of a reaction to everything that's happening in life, and also everything's happening to the person. So you can imagine when we do these practices like meditation or breath work, or even just any spiritual practice, could even be for some people going to church. What's doing is preparing, the spirit, the mind, the body to be able to prepare for these challenges. Instead of looking at like life is happening to me, then you can then step back and be more aware and witness that situation and say like, oh, I can now see it. Now when I step back and observe, I can see that life is happening for me also. And then the evolution of that is like when you get into flow states and a lot of that piece, it's like life is just happening through me. And when life is happening through a person, it's less about them or even the other person. It's just like, oh, this is all divinely happening in this now moment also.
And that's such a powerful concept because when other people spark the positivity within us, it's like you said, it's a chain reaction. It spreads. Your day becomes better, then you're going to make the other person you talk to in an hour from now, they're going to make their day better, then they're going to make someone else's, and it's just an endless cycle. And then, generally speaking, you could say, oh, that's how you change the world. That's how you change people's days. That's how you change your world that you're in. Of course, you're not going to change everybody's consciousness on the planet from doing that, but you are doing something. You just never know how much of just a thing that you might perceive as a very small positive remark or something. You don't know how much that could really impact someone's day. I mean, how many people get compliments on a daily basis? Not many. I mean, I got a few within the last 2 months. I could say maybe I got two compliments, maybe three, right? We don't get compliments often, right? And so you never know, maybe someone's having a bad day. You're out in public, you see them, you like their shoes, you're just walking past them. Hey, man, I like your shoes. Oh, thanks, man. I blah, blah, blah. Maybe you start talking to them, right? Maybe they bought those pair of shoes yesterday and that made them feel even better about themselves, right? You just never know how small of a compliment or action could do to really help someone. And also doing your best to be able to surround yourself by positive people in your personal and close relationships. And I've realized over the past year and a half, how important that is. There's certain people that you go around, there's that guy, that girl, that specific person, when they walk into the room, they just light it up. There's people like that, right? And those types of people are the ones you want to surround yourself by. I have a friend as an example, his name is Kevin. I met him down when I was in Florida. And whenever I'm around this guy, my energy levels, my vibration, it rises. And this is just the type of guy that even if he's going through something, even if he isn't having the best day, he still shows up. He's nice, he's positive, and we have a great conversation. And he's just an absolutely incredible individual. And it's also worth understanding that sometimes you won't have those people in your life all the time, right? When I first started, the self-development journey, I was alone. I was doing it by myself. My friends didn't really enjoy doing it. They didn't like to hear me talk about it. And I was doing it by myself. And so sometimes you'll be on paths for a certain period of time where you're by yourself, but I promise it's only temporary. You work on yourself enough, you develop yourself spiritually, you get to a place where you just naturally start to attract the people who are doing what you're doing, right? And you could say, oh, nobody in the world is like me, all these other people, I just can't connect with people, right? You keep working on yourself. I know it sounds, I guess, cliche, but you keep working on yourself, you keep going, those people naturally flow into your life. That's what happened to me. I'm sure it happened for you. I'm sure it happens for everyone who's on that path.
I agree. And adding to that, putting yourself into the room is one big step, and doing it over and over is the process. Because the first time you put yourself into that new space, you get invited to, like, let's say, online circle or a workshop or a class, and you just say like, yeah, I'm just gonna go see what happens. That's a really big first step. Most people don't realize how big of a first step that is, to just break out of your normal routine and step outside the comfort zone and say like, oh, I'm gonna try this one thing. I'm gonna try this thing. Like, let's see what happens. And putting yourself into that environment where you're just a completely different person, like no one really knows you, and you can just really start to see like your identity is being crafted just by yourself. Like, you're crafting your identity and you're creating your story. And that's really key. And then also going back to the consciousness piece and looking at it from the place of I. So Ken Wilber, he talks about this. I think it's called the integral consciousness and stages. So it's like I. So you have I, we, and then all. So I has to do with everything that, on a personal level, I can be managing. I'm responsible for just basic things. Let's say I'm responsible for the choices of like food I eat, how much water I drink, how I breathe, how much I sleep, how I move my body, who do I spend time with, what am I doing for work. Those are like some base level I things that we can create on a personal level. And then once those things are, let's say in that process, we are saying once those things are a little bit more organized, then the we becomes a lot easier. It becomes easier to attract a partner, attract that job that you really want, or you connect with a deeper mission for your life because you've understood yourself. So self knowledge, I would say, is like the essence of all of this. It's through this journey, even as we grow as a collective, it's coming back to knowing yourself, like knowing yourself on a deeper level.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really about what you understand about yourself, and what you can control is what you put out into the world. A lot of the times we're putting stuff out into the world that, we're not even aware of. And it's sometimes destructive behavior, sometimes it's destructive thoughts that aren't beneficial to us or other people. So yeah, it always goes back to analyzing yourself and knowing what you're doing, because that you have the biggest impact on your own reality. That's what I've started to come to believe. Going back to the victim mentality thing, we can always think, no, it's Dan did me wrong and Sally said this, but ultimately, our conscious mind has a little gate. We might not always be aware of the gate, but we have a gate, and some people's gates are stronger than others. But we have a gate, and what we choose to let in and we let affect us. Every time somebody says something to you, and you get angry or you get sad, whatever emotion you feel, consciously or unconsciously, you gave them consent to let that in, right? There's a little gate in your conscious mind, and someone says something, and if your gate's strong enough and it's something negative and you understand that it's not going to benefit you, it just bounces off, right? And of course it takes work to develop that, but a lot of our gates are, we have big cracks in them. So someone tries to say something and it just seeps in there, and then it grows in your mind, and then you think about it for the rest of your day, and then it ruins your day, it ruins your week, it ruins your year, it ruins your life. And so we need to work on, creating a little bit of that mental strength within ourselves, and going back to the statement of what I think about me is more important than what other people think about me. And that's not to say that you can't take constructive criticism and you're never going to make mistakes and all that, but it is important to realize that you know who you are best most of the time. And look, if every single person you know is saying you're doing something wrong in this area, well, it's worth looking at it and exploring it. But if it's just one person out of 100 people that you're close with, obviously we're not really close with 100 people, but just to give that example, if it's just one person, well, then it might not be something super personal. It might just be one mistake you made, or it might not even have to do with you at all. So just understanding that what you believe about you is important, what other people believe about you, because if you just live your life based on what other people think about you and what they want for you, you'll end up miserable because you'll just neglect yourself and what you truly want. I mean, nowadays people don't really know what they want to do with their life at all, and they're not really searching for it. They're just kind of like, all right, well, my parents said this would probably make me a good amount of money, or this person said this would be good for me. And you go down the path, maybe it will be good for you. Maybe it'll work out. But, I see a lot of studies, and in every single study in the United States, between 60 and 80% of Americans, of all different types of incomes, the lowest to the highest, all different types of occupations, different gender, different everything. All these people are studied, and in every study, between 60 and 80% of them say they either dislike or they hate their jobs. And so I think to myself, it's like, well, I think a part of the reason why that might be true for some of us is because we never really truly sat down with ourselves and actually thought, well, yeah, everyone's saying I should do this, but is that what I really want? Is that what I'm passionate about? Is that what is going to fulfill my soul? And if it is, great. You run with it, you listen to everyone else. But sometimes people tell you to do things, and sometimes people want the best for you, but they don't know what's the best for you. Their direction they're trying to give you isn't always completely valid, although it is always still worth listening.
Yeah, so going diving into the story, right? Mindset being the story you tell yourself. And that story that you tell yourself is not only what you're telling to yourself, it's also you're telling to yourself about what you can do, what you can't do, who you are, who you aren't. And a lot of times it gets programmed into us from like an early age of who you are. So the subconscious or unconscious is like those first 7 years, 7 to 14 years of your life, or all of our lives, where we're not in control. In that process, the victim mentality gets programmed in. We are programmed to like see the world from a perspective that's not really accurate. It's not really true, because in that time period, it's your parents telling you what who you are, it's your grandparents, it's your brothers, sisters, it's sometimes your friends, it's your teachers. And at that time, you're like, whoa, who am I? You know, this is what people told me who I am, but who am I when I go deep and listen to myself deep down? And so when we talk about like a spiritual path or, uh, soul path, life journey, I think the key, the essence of it is knowing who you are. And for myself, one of the essential pieces of my journey was actually traveling. So when I first traveled and went on a trip by myself, that was my opportunity to start to understand, who am I? What's the story I'm telling myself? And what do I want? And what do I desire versus what do others desire from me?
Traveling and going to a place you haven't been before by yourself without all the people that and are comfortable with. And it's like you get to really see what parts of yourself come out, a great number of positive things and maybe certain insecurities that you didn't know you had. And you know, and then it's always worth exploring that stuff. And so many of us tend to neglect even sitting down with ourselves and thinking about who we really are. We feel lost, but we also don't give ourselves the time to figure out who we could be so that we don't feel lost anymore. And so many of us, especially younger individuals who are in middle school, high school, even in college, and even older at this point, everybody's so focused on obviously what everyone says that they should do. You should do this, you should party while you're young, you should do this, and you do you, right? But I don't think getting blackout drunk 4 times a week is going to help you discover yourself, or as people like to say, oh, I'm working on myself. And that means, yeah, I'm just single and partying all the time. But in terms of the path of self-discovery, this isn't going to help. And addictions like scrolling on social media is more potent than ever. I
Mm-hmm.
was talking to a bunch of people, and people say, oh, I'm scrolling for 3 4 5 6 hours a day. And it's this is a real issue that so many of us are dealing with. And it's the second we feel bored, it's like, okay, let me pick up my phone. There's no allowing the thoughts to come in and seeing what thoughts come in, and all right, am I thinking more positive or negative, and what are the thoughts. There's no chance to even observe what our thoughts are, because the second we feel any ounce of boredom, okay, I just finished this task, what do I do now? uh 1 second later, I don't really know, let me pick up my phone. You're on your phone for the next 2 hours scrolling and taking in meaningless information. So I think it's really about taking our power back. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, these social media platforms and addictions like scrolling have taken our consciousness from us, which is essentially our life, because what we focus on with our sight and our hearing and our senses, what we're aware of is what we focus on. And if we're just focusing on scrolling, then obviously we're not going to make much life progress, and we can't it's not going to be easy to reach any sort of happiness or contentment with your life.
Yeah, what you focus on expands. What you focus on grows is so true. It's like if you wanted to build a house, there's some steps there. Like get the material, have the land, have the tools to be able to build it, then still like design it, and then there's still then the work of like, okay, we need to make sure this goes here, put everything together, and what you focus on will be built and expand. um, and I think one of the best tools for focus is the breath. And the reason I say the breath is because meditation, things like meditation, prayer, other spiritual practices are powerful. Though for the ordinary person, it's hard to connect with it. It's way easier to do like 5 to 10 minutes of breath work and be like, oh, do you see now? Like your breath, we just did a little bit of breathing, and your whole state of being is shifted just from 5 to 10 minutes of breathing and paying attention to your breath. Breathing can be a really big shift. Breathing consciously and being aware of a breath is a really big shift for people.
Within your group community call the other day with some breath work, and I was feeling, my body was a little bit tingly after, and I felt more calm and I felt present. And it's so amazing what something like that seems so minuscule and small, like, oh, I'm just breathing, like I breathe all the time every day, but it's like the
Mm-hmm.
power of focusing on that and consciously directing it. And okay, I'm going to breathe in this amount of times and hold it, or I'm going to release it for this amount of seconds. And it's like being able to control that. That's an incredible practice, and of course you're very experienced with it. How did you discover that?
Breathwork actually wasn't like my introduction to spiritual practices. I'd say like the introduction was meditation. And no one really taught me. I sat down one day and was like, let me try this thing out. I'm just gonna sit quietly and listen to myself and be present. And in that process, I would say like over time, I noticed, oh, my breath is changing as I'm being still and sitting and being in silence and present with myself. Growing up, I actually was born and diagnosed with asthma. So from a young age, everyone's telling me like you have asthma, you need medications, you can't breathe. Like, oh, you're having a problem, here you go. Like, oh, you got sick, here's a medication. And I was doing that all the time until I would say like high school. And I was like, I don't know why I'm even using these medications. They're not even helping. I just stopped. And I started, more holistic living, eating better, paying attention to who I'm surrounding myself with, what I'm doing, how much water I'm drinking, and all these simple things, movement practices, all these simple things really made a big difference. And then meditation became natural when it arrived in my life. It was like, I wish I knew the power of meditation and breath when I was an athlete also, because
Mm.
it's just like so powerful to be conscious and aware while you're on the field or playing a sport. It's like one of the best things ever. You're just like, I'm in control. Like, I'm loving this.
I asked the question, so what if we were taught from a young age to meditate and focus on our breath? How much of a better place would the world be just by that simple exercise? Because a lot of the stuff that we're taught when we're younger gets programmed in us and it sticks with us. And instead of all this, sometimes negative stuff and limiting beliefs put into us, what if we were taught to focus on our awareness and taught to focus on our breath? It's like, how many people nowadays who are, their immediate reaction is to respond with anger. How many of those people would instead respond with taking a second to take a deep breath and, analyze their thoughts for a second and then respond in a nice way or in at least a non-angry way, throwing back the energy, right? And so I just think about that, and I think that simple practice of awareness and meditation is just, it's phenomenal. And if more of us in the world, even if you're like, oh, spirituality is weird, like I don't want to get it. Even if you're on that playing field, just try meditating. You'll start feeling benefits and you'll get the experience of elevated consciousness, you could say.
Yeah, I think that's like, you hit on a really good point as well. That imagine a world where kids growing up were taught, oh, what's the benefit of 5 minutes of breath work or 5 minutes of meditation? Not with the perspective of like, I'm going to teach you about something spiritual or religious, just with the perspective of this is something that is just as healthy for you as eating certain type of food or drinking water, or reading a book. I think the world would be completely different because it's a practice that allows us just to be more present and allows us to feel our emotions versus push it away also.
I completely agree with that. What is holistic consciousness?
Yeah, so that's great. So holistic, meaning the levels that I see in holistic consciousness: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and then even looking at it from like your mission, like vocational, professional, financial also. Because in our life, we sometimes go straight to professional, financial. However, why aren't we looking at these other ones? Mental growth, emotional growth, spiritual, they're all connected, and not one is better than the other. Yeah, it's great to be an athlete and bodybuilder or be a professional in a sport, though that's not the only thing that's important about a person. There's also like what's behind that, like mentally, what's there, emotionally, how do they manage their emotions. So all these things play a role in becoming a more whole being. So holistic consciousness is like seeing all the parts are part of this one consciousness and being whole.
That's a beautiful way to describe it. And it also made me think about, when you said most people, just focus on the professional aspect. We very much like labels and labeling people. You're this, you're that, you're not that, you can't do that, or you can do that. And everyone's always labeling each other. And it's like, okay, you were a football player, let's say, for example. you are a
Yeah.
football player. That is you. That is your identity. That is completely you. And so, you know, I think what often happens, you know, with professionals, let's say you work a job, you get a job when you're 20, for example, and then you work it for the same job for the next 40 years, that becomes a part of your identity. And then once you, let's say, retire or you just no longer do it anymore, you lose a part of your identity because you started to believe that that was you. It's like, you know, the way I think about it, it's like, yes, you're doing it. Yes, you're super involved in it. It's a part of your life, but it's separate from you. It is not you. And so I think if people, you know, went into, like, let's say they knew they were going to work a job or believed they were going to work a job for the next 40 years, I think it's worth going into it understanding that, so that, you know, you work your hardest at it and you do your best, but understanding that the job isn't you. You are your own separate person. You're not just that label of the consultant or the police officer, the doctor, whatever it is.
Oh yeah, playing football growing up. When you were saying that, you sound like my dad. It's like my dad's like, yeah, who's Zach? He's just, Zach. He's a football player, and that was my identity. Like playing football, playing sports, going to school, being a student. That was all I knew growing up. If like outside of that, like who was I? I had no idea who I was. It was also really great training for me. Now, like going into the coaching space or into the professional space, I know that, yeah, let's say I do this for the next 20 years. I've already done that with football. I spent most of my life growing up until even in college playing football. So now let's say I spent 8 years traveling, exploring, learning, and becoming a coach or becoming a teacher, facilitator. Let's say I do 20 years now, like coaching, 20 years, like committed to this practice. I also know that at that 20th year, I can also let it go because I've already let go of things from my past. And I know that this isn't permanent. Like I could be a coach for 20 years, and then at the 20th year, I'm like, I don't want to do this. I want to, let's say, I want to go like live on a farm and raise animals and just be out in nature. I could also do that, and it's the identity that we create for ourselves. That story is always shifting.
You know, everything in life is always changing, and a lot of things, in fact, you could say everything is temporary. I mean, it's, depends on what you believe after you die or if you believe anything happens. But leaving that aside, up until your point of perceived death, everything's always changing. Relationships with people are changing. The way you think about yourself in the world is always changing. What you're doing in the world is changing. You might have daily routines now that you do for the next year, but then after that year, you're going to start to change some things. The point is, everything is always changing. And a lot of the times, change can be good and it can lead to more growth, because if we are constantly doing the same thing and getting no different outcome, well, then nothing's going to change. But we oftentimes, especially as human beings, I find we're afraid of change. And it's like, okay, well, we're comfortable now. Once things get a little bit more uncomfortable, maybe a new situation happens, a new person comes into our life, things are changing. Sometimes it's like, oh, it's a little scary, it's a little weird. And I think it's okay to feel, a little bit scared that things are changing. You're unsure of what's going to happen because there's so much uncertainty in life, and that's completely normal. But it's also, I'd say worth understanding that we need to develop the ability to let go, because like our own life, everything is temporary, everything will come to pass. It's also worth understanding that if you're in a not great place right now, maybe you're struggling in certain areas of your life, you're dealing with some issues, that's temporary too, right? You might say to yourself, oh, I'm going to be sad forever, this is it's not going to last forever, right? I think some things could last forever if you're in a dark place and you don't do any, inner work. But if you do the work, there's no reality where you don't get out of it. Even if you try at something and people say, you don't reach the first end goal that you make, people might say you failed, but you're still not in the same place you were before. You still changed, you still grew, and that's progress. Even, people say it's like just putting one foot in front of the other, making 1% of progress every day. 1%, even though you might want to improve 50% by tomorrow, 1% is progress, and you're better off. And the goal is to make yourself better than the person you were yesterday.
Yeah, a piece of that is courage. Having the courage to do something different, having the courage to make the change, to take action, even if it's something super small. Taking action on that one thing, and having the courage to face your fear. Full circle back to what you were saying before. The emotions are initiation. It's a ceremony. So whenever you're having intense like fear or sadness or anxiety, depression, all these emotions, it's really a ceremony that's happening for you. And it's a call to go into them, to enter into that cave and experience that emotion. And there's no failure. There's no failure. Failure isn't really, it doesn't really exist when you're in this journey. It's really about what do you learn in the process, because even if you say you do fail at something, like, yeah, the worst case scenarios, right? You don't have money, you don't have health, you don't have all these things, you're still going to be in a position where you have experienced more and you've learned in the journey because you've done the thing versus just thinking about the thing. And I think that's like a really key piece, is like taking action, do it, experience life, and you'll find out on the other side. You can't find out by not doing it and just staying at home. You find out by testing your limits and seeing what happens.
That is super powerful. Right now, you're saying this sucks. This process is awful. I hate feeling this way. But sometime in the future, might not be now, might not be tomorrow, might not even be a year from now, but sometime in the future, you will look back and you will be able to say, I'm glad I went through that. Yes, it sucked in the moment, but it made me who I was and it gave me that experience. Like, for example, for me personally, I was severely depressed at one point, but I can look, and during that time, it was awful. If you asked me, hey, would you rather be depressed for the next year or not? I would say not. And then, of course, right? But having gone through that experience and then getting myself out of it through different practices and thought processes and learning new knowledge, that journey of me going through that made me who I was. We're doing this podcast. I have a YouTube channel. I started coaching. I started doing all this stuff. If I didn't go through that, I can, of course, I don't know because it would be a different reality, but I'm 99% sure that I wouldn't be doing any of this right now if I didn't go through the experience that I did. And so I think for everybody, and for anyone listening, it's worth looking at all the negative things that, happened in your past that you might even be going through now, and understand that it's only temporary. And like you said, Nat, like you beautifully put it, Zach, on the other side of that, that's when you realize that, in a sense, it was a positive thing.
Yeah, on the other side of fear is your everything that you've ever imagined, like growth, more freedom, more life, peace. All those values are on the other side of your fears, and it's important to lean in. And something that is really present with me right now, like I've been learning, is that it can be simple. It can be so simple. Like courage doesn't have to be something like, oh, you did this like giant task that took you 6 months to complete, and you're like, oh, like this thing, and everyone's gonna see you and say you're the best. No, that's not always what looks like. And then full circle, courage could be what you said: say something nice to someone, be kind, be present. It can also look like doing a small challenge for yourself. Go to the gym, take a walk, meditate for 5 minutes, take a cold shower for 1 minute. That wasn't a lot of time. 1 minute, 5 minute walk, 5 minutes meditation. You're already showing yourself that you can do this.
All those, well, you might think is like small practices and stuff that, it's not really going to do anything. I'm only doing it for 5 minutes. It has an impact. And it works and it helps, but you don't know that it works and helps if you haven't tried it, right? Because a lot of people from the outside, if you've never heard about doing any of those practices, you might initially hear it and like, oh, I don't need to do that. I'm fine or whatever, right? But then you start to do them, you realize, okay, well, this is, maybe I wasn't fine, or maybe, I am doing okay, but this is making my life even better. And I'm feeling even better after this minute of cold shower. I have more energy after I take a cold shower and I just feel great, right? But, if you've just taken hot showers your entire life and you never tried it, well, then you never know, what the experience could be for you. So, I mean, that just always goes back to, trying new things. Because if we don't try new things, we're not going to get any different outcomes. I guess in my mental health struggles in the past, I got to the point where I realized, okay, well, life sucks. I'm doing the same thing every day. Something has to change. And so I started to change what I was doing, and then that started to change what I was thinking. And then when I started to change when it started to change what I think, then I would take even different actions and then different processes. And so it's just, you try something new, even if it's just for 5 minutes, could change your life.
I agree.
Absolutely. Zach, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Likewise, brother. It was great to connect in, drop in, share some wisdom, share some insights, and looking forward to keep on flowing with you.
Yeah, I'm super grateful we shared this space today. For people who want to check out your content, what you do, where can they find you?
Easiest way is on Instagram, just Zach Barney.lm. So ZACHBARNEY.lm. And yeah, you can find me there and would love to have a conversation, connect. And if any of these things that we talked about interest you, let's dive in and explore.
Absolutely. All right, we'll catch you guys in the next one.